my gloves are, Tracy's like, my gloves are wet. And I was like, better than
You're muted again, Tony.
Can't hear you, Tony.
No, now you can hear me. Right?
Yep, you're good.
All right. All right, welcome. Yeah, I heard a little bit of background noise there. I was trying to figure that out, but thank you guys for taking care of that. So as you can see, I'm Tony Pendola. I am the North Carolina Small Business Ombudsman Environmental Assistance Program. And this panel is going to talk to you about 6H, the paint stripping and miscellaneous coating, surface coating niche app, 6H. And you are so lucky. This is an all engineer panel. I don't remember the last time we had an all engineer panel, but you're in for a treat. I'm sure it's going to be great. I'm going to introduce our experts that are on today with us, and then give you a little background on what I've been doing, and there'll be some nuggets in there, and talk about what the NSC has already said about this rule. And then we're going to hear from John Feather, and we're going to hear from David Darling, and it's going to be pretty interactive. They have some things to say, and then there'll be some questions and stuff. And I think you'll find that, you know, everybody wants to learn from each other. So that's what we're doing here. So first, let me start off. I'll give an introduction on David. David Darling is Vice President of Health, Safety, and Environmental Affairs for the American Coatings Association, or ACA. During his 23 years at ACA, David has worked on coatings manufacturing, environmental compliance issues, industrial surface coating and architectural coating VOC regulations, and post-consumer paint issues. He has an MS and a BS in environmental engineering from Syracuse University and is a licensed professional engineer. And then I'm also going to tell you about John. John Feather is an environmental engineer with the with EPA's Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. At EPA, he worked on regulatory development for a variety of mineral and manufacturing industries, and is project lead for the 6H technology review. He has prior experience, including working for an NGO, a non-governmental organization, municipality, industry, and academia. He has a BS and an MS in chemical engineering with an environmental focus, along with a BA in political science from the University of Arizona. So with that, I'm going to give you guys a little background, and then we'll have John talk for a while, and then we'll have David talk for a while, and then we'll have a little parlay here. So I started working, well, I've been in this working with small businesses for over a quarter of a century now, but I got started with 6H pre-proposal, as did many of us, because we were very interested in this rule. It was one of those times when they were doing a rule that was going to affect a whole lot of small businesses. It went from, you know, bigger rules affecting mostly bigger businesses to something that really rocked our world. And so I got involved with EPA early on, doing video like I usually do for them, and getting them into small businesses so they could film. And then they asked me to be on their collision repair campaign team, which is pretty great for me. And it was good for them in that, you know, not being in the federal bureaucracy, I was a little more nimble, and I could get stuff up on a website in a couple of weeks instead of a couple months. And, you know, there were some other things. And then, of course, I had all you guys backing me up, and I was able to take issues and questions to you. And so that's a little bit of what we're doing, continuing on today. We just started a long time ago, and it's been a great relationship. So I'm sure it will continue to be. With the CRC, Collision Repair Campaign, EPA took me to NACE in Las Vegas, which is a massive trade association meeting, over 22,000 shops, and I helped them man the booth and teach 6H courses. There, I briefed the Society of Collision Repair Specialists, SCRS, their board. I just told them about the rule. Start to finish, I had like 10 minutes. Aaron Schollenberg said, you got to condense it down. Okay, I'll try. So I give them the rule, start to finish. And then somebody got up, and there was quite a bit of open hostility, which shocked me, honestly. And it was, you know, a guy with a really great shop saying, don't stop telling people about this exemption. They don't need to hear about that. And I told him, well, it's part of the rule, so I got to tell them about it. But some of those people there had the take that everybody should be the best possible shop there is, and they should be that way right from the start. And we shouldn't water down the message or something like that. So thought that was interesting. There was a major periodical there, Collision Week. They were a little shocked by everything I had to say, and they asked me to do that again on video and sent that out to 22,000 of their subscribers with the headline, "Guilty Until Proven Innocent," which caused a little bit more of a shockwave. And people had a lot of things to say about that. We'll get to it a little bit more later. So after that, I was working with a client who needed to know if they were spraying target HAPs, if they could get a petition for exemption, which is something that this rule requires. So I happen to know that their paint manufacturer kept all the data electronically, and that client didn't know that, but I was able to call over and get everything. And then I decided to take that to a higher level and talk to the national folks, or international, and ask for a list of all of their paints that had the target HAPs in them. So they gave that to me. And then I used peer pressure to get that from all the other paint manufacturers. So that was pretty great. And we put it up on our website about a year ago, a decade ago, not a year ago, a decade ago, at least. And we are the only place, the national sbeep.org is the only place where all this exists from every paint manufacturer, as far as I know. And it's a great tool for figuring out if you can petition for exemption. Well, back then, maybe not that many people could, but the industry essentially was making two different coatings for some that had the target HAPs, because California didn't allow some of those target HAPs in California. So they made a special formulation for California. And they just said, essentially, it'd be nicer to have one for the whole country. It's a lot easier. So they just went to that. In doing that, they reformulated out the target HAPs tremendously, like almost entirely. And it's just gotten better and better over the years. So while maybe back when this first started, not a whole bunch of people could take advantage of the petition. Nowadays, I think almost everybody can. And if you look at our website, you'll see a little bit more about that. Well, I used those paint manufacturer lists to develop a RegNav tool. And that's just something to make it a lot easier for sources to figure out whether they're exempt or not. And EPA hosts it, and so it's a little bit more official and they trust it more. And that just recently came out not that long ago. I got that done during COVID. So since that time, I have developed a free online 6H learning management system, but unfortunately, it hasn't been published yet. It needs a little bit more work to be able to get it online and stuff. So stay tuned for that, but it's something we are working on, and we hope to host on the National SB website as soon as it's done. So that's a little bit of background on me and what I've been doing. Along in there, we wrote some comments, as we often do, but the last set of comments when we talked about auto body shops was Executive Order 13777. And we wrote 20-some pages of comments on different rules. And on auto body shops, we said, this guilty until proven innocent thing is kind of weird. As far as I know, it's the only rule like it of its kind that presumes an entire industry sector is subject to a rule unless they ask to be let out of it. It's a challenge. I'm sure many of you have come across this. I mean, trying to do a petition for exemption for every source that wants out. If they don't do that, then there's some fairly onerous rules that, while they might not be that hard, they might, the source is probably doing a lot of those things anyway. Documenting it, keeping it all straight, that's a little bit more challenging. So that's what we wrote essentially in our comments on that rule. We also said that the definition of a spray booth that it gave is different than what OSHA gives for a definition, and that causes some confusion, and that might be something that needs changing. We also had other comments that dealt with different things like, once in, always in. One of the ones that also pertains to this rule is we had a good bit written in there about how electronic reporting is hard for small businesses, and we need to be really careful requiring small businesses to do electronic reporting. It's harder for them, more of a problem for them than it is for larger businesses. So essentially we said, please don't discriminate against auto body shops. They don't need to be treated differently than every other miscellaneous surface coater out there. Just treat them all the same. And if they choose to be part of that rule, or if they want to use target HAPs, then by all means, let's regulate them as such, but otherwise let them out without going through that big process. So with that, I would like to turn it over to John and have him tell you about the 6H technology review that he is doing right now. We really have two of the top experts on this in the country. It's so good to have them. John's gonna get a proposal for this rule, and ACA is going to be involved. So we are very lucky to have everybody on this panel. And John, are you there? Got to take it off mute, and you can. Yeah, there you go.
Yep, I'm here.
Go ahead, take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate all the work you've done and all the work that the SVPs do, being feet on the ground, helping sources to comply, giving us information we may not get otherwise. We do appreciate that. So thanks again for inviting me. As Tony mentioned, I'm John Feather with the US EPA. I'm project lead for 6H. I'll just go through some basic background information, what we're currently doing, kind of how we originally developed the regulation, a bit of kind of description of how it works, how it's set up, and then go over the technology review I'm currently working on. It's not really meant to be like a compliance guide or inspector training or anything, more just my perspective as a rule writer and project lead. And apologies for non-engineers having an all-engineer panel, but so as Tony mentioned, back in 2008, we promulgated the initial NACE app, the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. It is a really wide scoped rule. Have 3 different source categories, have paint stripping, surface coating of motor vehicles and mobile equipment, like 35,000 auto shops pretty much. And then miscellaneous surface coating operations, which is a whole bunch of random metal and plastic manufacturing operations. So putting all these together was kind of unwieldy, and we did have to address a wide variety of types of sources and try to find common areas that would be applicable to all the sources. Under the Clean Air Act, we are required to conduct a technology review for a NACE app every 8 years. So we kind of look and see what developments have occurred in the industry and control devices and ways to reduce emissions. As you may have noticed, we're now doing the technology review in 2021, and we had the original rule in 2008. So we're a little bit late in getting that carried out, been pretty busy. So we do have a quarter deadline to propose a technology review by November 1st of this year, 2021. And we'll get the final rule out by November 1st of next year, 2022. So it's pretty quick timeline, but we do appreciate talking with you, and any input you can provide before the proposal would be great. And we do accept comments after proposal too, and we'll consider everything before and after. And we hope to have a good depiction of industry practices and current practices. So we do appreciate all the information you can provide. So a lot of you may have dealt with many different NACE app, many different air toxic standards, air standards. 6H is kind of a pretty niche rule, pretty narrow scope. For air toxics, we have Clean Air Act Section 112. This is a subset of that. It's we're operating under the Integrated Urban Air Toxics Standard, 112C3, we had to list enough air source categories to represent 90% of the air source emissions for each of the 30 urban air toxics that pose the greatest threat. Of those, methane chloride and the target HAP were part of the dirty 30. So that was why 6H was listed for those target HAP. We actually added in the miscellaneous surface coatings, which include auto stops, later on, trying to get to the 90% threshold. So any individual auto stop emits very little HAP. And even as an entire source category, there's not that much HAP being emitted, but we did list basically auto stops and all the other miscellaneous surface coating categories as part of the required amount to get above the 9% threshold of air source emissions for these 6 hazardous air pollutants being covered. So this is kind of a unique rule that we typically wouldn't have listed it for these reasons, except that we had a certain requirement under the Clean Air Act. In the initial niche app, we did start off pretty broad scope, looking at the entire source category, and we're looking at all the hazardous air pollutants from the entire industry. Based on comments, we did scale that back a bit. We did narrow the scope. We provided more exemptions. We narrowed the HAP focus, the hazardous air pollutant focus, from all HAP down to just the target HAP, the 5 metal compounds, chromium, lead, manganese, nickel and cadmium, and methane chloride for paint stripping. So we did reduce the scope in that sense. There are some differences between the, as Tony mentioned, how we treat the miscellaneous surface coating operations that are non-auto stop pretty much from the auto stop ones, but they're kind of they are different in form, function. So that was our consideration at the time. We were happy to get more information on that. And we may reconsider how we differentiate those 2 source categories. If things have materially changed since then, we'll consider that. Kind of going back into the distinction between the source categories. In miscellaneous surface coating operations, they do tend to be more like manufacturing facilities. They have a few coatings they use that are well documented, used in large scope and scale. It is a little bit difficult. It is different and difficult to keep track of what coatings are being used in auto stops, as I'm sure that you've been dealing with yourselves. Tony's done a great job of talking with paint manufacturers and getting the STSs and the target HAP compositions and all that, but it is difficult to do that, and especially when you start mixing different coatings, it can be hard to know which coatings would be considered target HAP coatings based on the composition percentage. So at the time, EPA wasn't confident that we could identify all of these small auto stops that were spread across the country, and we weren't confident that we could get the required information to know that the standards were being carried out. We still have some difficulty getting that information. As I'm sure all of you are aware, 6H has been widely delegated out, and each state, region, locality has been implementing it, but information doesn't always flow back to HQ, to where I am, and it can be difficult to get that all together in an organized method. That was one thing we were considering with e-reporting, that it would provide us an avenue to collect that information more centrally so that we could have a better idea of what actually is happening within the industry and the regions. Just kind of going back a little bit. So this is a area source niche app technology view. In many of the other actions that our division is currently doing, we look at like major sources, and in those cases, there's a different process. We have risk looking at, we look at all the hazardous air pollutants, we look at maximum achievable control technology. In this case, we are pretty narrowly focused just on the, again, 6 target HAP and methane chloride. We're just doing generally available control technology. So we're looking at what's around in industry in general. And so our review is not quite as detailed as an RTR. We don't have the need to get such detailed emission information. But if you are doing a review of technologies, changes in technology, we do appreciate having any information on changes within industry practices or formulations of coatings or control technologies. Kind of going back a bit more into the rule history. As mentioned, we did make a lot of exemptions, and we had a process for getting exemptions from the requirements. As I mentioned, we did kind of, in the final rule, we did automatically exempt miscellaneous surface coating operations which didn't use target HAP. And we did have a provision that for sources in the motor vehicle and mobile equipment surface coating operations, if they didn't use target HAP, they could petition for exemption and show that they didn't. It has been very helpful that Tony's been collecting that information, and hopefully at this point, 13 years into the regulations being promulgated, at this point, we're encouraged that target HAP usage has apparently decreased quite a bit as industry has provided many target HAP free coatings. It's been good to see the list that Tony's provided that show how many target HAP free coatings are available and how many can replace old target HAP containing coatings. This is kind of a high-level perspective on 6H, but I'll just kind of give a quick discussion of the actual requirements, just kind of give some context to that. For paint stripping, this isn't really a main focus of, imagine for the SBs or for industry, but basically we try to make the standards pretty accessible and low burden while encouraging the minimization of use of and loss of methane chloride. And it's just management practices without, sorry, I don't have any actual slides, apologies. I'm just kind of going through the material by speaking, apologies. And then for surface coating operations, which is pretty much paint shops, we did try to, again, not be too prescriptive, though we did look at what industry was. Sorry, you have a question? Okay, I'll carry on. So we did try to not be too prescriptive in the standards. We did, as Tony mentioned, we did visit different auto shops. We did many site visits out to California and talked with Iowa about waste reduction. We did set standards on how to train painters on how to use the equipment and minimize loss of coatings. We did have requirements for spraying within a spray booth. They're not quite like the OSHA standards, But within our division, we do have coating sector rules that we try to keep in similar practices. We have a bunch of area source categories and major source categories. And as we try to make consistent practices within EPA, we do factor in OSHA guidelines, but that's
What I'm doing is I'm looking for the
could we should
I'm
unmute?
looking for the sale ad, and I had it on my phone, and I can't seem to find it.
I believe someone may have been
That's what's
unmuted
weird. It was just for
accidentally.
the Memorial Day sale. It was 25% off. It was an LG top loader with a dryer.
I think they'll get on
I
it in
can't
just a
find-
second. There you go. Sorry about that.
Great, thank you.
Sorry about that. We try to jump on right away when that happens, so.
It happens, definitely. I've been seeing congressional hearings that they've had problems with muting, so yeah. So we try to minimize being prescriptive in our standards. It has been 13 years since we originally created the standards, and we're happy to hear from SBs and industry if there have been changes in practices, or if we can be less burdensome while still ensuring that we are environmentally and health protective. In my technology view, talking with Tony, talking with others, it doesn't sound like there's been that much of a change in general operations. The big thing is probably the product reformulations. Many more target HAP-free coatings are available. There may have been some changes with industry structure, like dealerships may have stopped refinishing automobiles themselves and instead relied more on mobile companies that handle that for dealerships. If you have any other input on that, if you have any other changes you've seen in the industry, that'd be interesting to us. We'd appreciate hearing that. In our technology view, we have found some reductions in target app usage, but nothing that was really different in direction than we had found earlier, that there were reformulation possibilities early on when we're doing the initial niche app development. That's more predominant now, but I'm not sure that we consider that a development. We are looking at some updates and changes to the rule, just as we've heard feedback from regions and industry and sources. There's an outdated method. We're going from ASHRAE 52.1 to ASHRAE 52.2. Updating, and sorry if I've missed any questions. I don't think I've seen any hands at this point, but if you have any questions, feel free to keep them in hold and I'll be happy to go back to that. Sorry for rushing through this myself.
That's okay. John, we'll take questions at the end just for time sake.
Okay, sounds good. And so then kind of the last rule update we're looking at, maybe clarifying the definition of target HAP containing coatings. There's been some confusion I've heard from out in the delegate authorities. The rule text wasn't clear, but we did mean to say that the percent composition definition of target HAP containing coatings referred to the overall mixture as applied, not each individual component as purchased. So it can be difficult to track, but it's not quite as stringent a standard. And Tony's input was useful about electronic reporting. We are looking at doing that. Our understanding is that it could simplify reporting, avoid duplication of effort. It'd be helpful for us to have a better idea of what's going on in the industry. We are receptive to feedback on how to make that more simple. for this rule, there's not that much that's required to be reported to EPA. So we're thinking that we don't need a complicated template. We don't really need a particularly involved process, but just giving us some basic information we think would be helpful to everyone involved. But feedback on that would be helpful. And we have heard from Tony and others that target hap usage has decreased as the target hap food coatings are used more often. We are considering a simplified option for sources to just let EPA know that they're not using any target hap containing coatings. I understand that it can be difficult, especially for small auto shops, to show to EPA or delegate authorities that they don't use any target hap coatings. So this way, we'd still expect them, of course, not to use them, but they wouldn't have to do quite as much paperwork collecting all that information together, that they could just keep records on hand at their sites and let us know that they don't use those target hap containing coatings. That's still being considered within EPA, and any feedback you have on that would be much appreciated. I've mentioned a few things I'd be happy to have feedback on. I've been talking with Tony, and he's been very helpful in this. He's been reaching out to the ACA, and we're happy to work with the ACA too and get any feedback that Devin may provide too. Would be especially interested in information on changes in the product formulations and how that's changed within industry over time. We're happy to consider that into our technology review and perhaps adjust the regulations with that in mind, but would need some data to truly justify any changes on that basis. And as SBEEPs, as we've gone through the rules over the past 13 years, if you found stuff that didn't make sense or wasn't applicable, was unduly burdensome, we'd be happy to hear it. At HU, I'm not out at the paint shops, and I do appreciate all the input you guys have. And sorry for running through that quickly, but do you have any questions at this point? I saw a question in the chat. Sorry. And
So the question in the chat comes from Angela Taylor. And Angela, if I don't say this properly, you are welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question or provide further clarification. Everyone should be able to see it. Angela is asking, are they providing methodology or calculation examples for as applied, quote unquote, for the coatings?
Not currently, but we're happy to consider that. It can be difficult to calculate out for each and every paint mixture what the actual target hap composition would be. I know there are some electronic means of collecting that information and doing calculations. I'm not sure how widely available that is, but we can look into that more. We can look into also providing more detailed methodology and examples. Is that helpful? Any other follow-ups on that?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll say that first off, in the RegNav tool, I provided an example calculation for a pearl. And that is because when a long time ago, a lot of the pearls had target hap in them above the threshold levels. Remember, if the SDS does not require it to be shown, you can have target hap in there, but it means it's below those threshold levels. And so it might not show up on the SDS, the safety data sheet. But pearls often have a higher percentage than the thresholds. However, A pearl is something that changes the way a car looks, and you use a very small amount of it compared to the total amount of paint. And most paints, you have like a 50-50 split of a toner and a reducer. And so as far as example calculations go, most of them are quite simple because you have a toner and a reducer. And nowadays, a lot of facilities have mix racks where it does it all for them. There's a computer that picks out how much of each different paint it needs and just makes it based on formulation and stuff. But we do have one example. We could use others, but again, it only really matters for target HAPs, not VOCs, because that's not what this rule is about. And therefore, it doesn't come into play very often.
Cool, thank you. A reporting calendar. So could you clarify that, Jasmine? Jasmine Blyden, I think you had a question. Do you have a reporting calendar for the sector? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
So a reporting calendar, I'm pretty sure, Jasmine, and you can unmute yourself to clarify, but I'm pretty sure what she's talking about is a compliance calendar. So for dry cleaners, gas stations, other industry sectors that are under a NACE app, or even have a lot of record keeping requirements, we put together reporting compliance calendars. And to my knowledge, when we put a call out for the website to collect compliance calendars, we have gotten some for metal fabricators and for printers, but we have never gotten any for auto body.
Okay, thank you. In this current review, I don't believe that would be changing anything in that regard. We wouldn't be changing any compliance dates or frequencies. I think it'd stay the same.
I don't think there'd be as much need or call for the record keeping for this industry sector as there are for maybe some of the other ones that we've developed those compliance calendars for. So Angela Taylor, moving on to her question, and everyone's being kind of shy today. You can raise your hand and ask a question yourself, but so if the HAP, Angela says, if the HAPs are, and we're just getting a little echo, if the HAPs are retained in the coating and not volatile, is that accounted for in the calculations, or does that matter?
Good question, but in this case, it's for the composition of the coatings and not for the actual emissions. So we have a standard that if a coating contains less than a threshold of 1% for non-carcinogenic HAP, target HAP, or 0.1% for carcinogenic target HAP, then if it's below that threshold, then it's not considered a target containing HAP. If it's above that threshold, then it would be a target containing HAP. So we don't really consider whether it's retained or volatile. It's just a definition for purposes of which coatings would be subject to the standard. Does that make sense? Cool. And then next question, I believe from Angela Taylor. If there's a range on the SDS, if it's what's required through testing a coating, we just assume worst case percentage. Actually, Tony, you're talking about this recently. You don't take that?
Just need you to unmute yourself there, Tony.
Oh yeah, sorry. If there's a range on the SDS, is the source required to do testing of the coating or just assume worst case? Well, so, again, in this case, it's all about the SDS. So nobody's required to do any kind of testing on the coating, because your paint manufacturer will tell you if it's above a threshold level of a target HAP in there. Now, where this can get a little confusing on the compliance side is some of these coatings have below the threshold amount of target HAP in them. So if you were to spray those coatings, and say a lot of them, and then you took your filter media and cut it out and sent it to a lab and had a TCLP, a toxic characteristic leaching protocol test put on it, it might show that there's some target HAP in there. That doesn't mean that you're in violation of this rule necessarily, because like I said, sometimes it's in there. I've seen it. I've gotten specific information on specific paints where I've been able to ascertain that there was target HAP in there below the thresholds. But of course, it doesn't matter for this rule. They did a bright line, and that's what we go by.
Cool, thank you.
And just to be more clear too, I mean, many of you are familiar, but lots of times, so an SDS is designed for OSHA for safety. It is not designed for environmental, but it has some components on there that tell what's in that paint. Lots of times they do ranges. And so you might see 5 to 15% of toluene or something like that. And that's when we all start, making some assumptions. There's lots of ways to do that. The easiest way to make everybody happy sometimes is to use the max, but that doesn't really come into play like this. But also, whenever I get a client like that, and the range is a problem, you can usually get a technical data sheet, an environmental data sheet, whatever they call it. You can get specific information about one paint instead of a group of paints that might have a bigger range. So that might help too.
So I wanted to follow up with Tony on that. I totally agree. Getting the environmental data sheet, those tend to have a lot more precision and environmental data, and they're almost exactly what environmentalists would need. Some companies do not release environmental data sheets, and you may have to request specifically from them. I recently contacted one of the major manufacturers. They were very quick to respond, and they sent what was known as a regulatory sheet, and they actually said, do not share this with the company itself. So that's a bit strange, but it does contain the data in very precise amounts that is required. So the safety data sheets, it has a range. You got to use the worst case in most cases. But if you want more precision, get that environmental data sheet or regulatory, and if necessary, contact the company.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate here. We've got David on here, and he's an expert in this, and we haven't really got him talking yet. But David, if you want to weigh in on any of this, I know the behind the scenes story.
Yeah, so you just want me to jump in?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I'm with American Coatings Association. We're an association that represents the coating manufacturing and raw material suppliers to the industry. So the auto refinish or the metal parts, plastic parts, applicators are essentially our customers. So I guess I'll jump in. Those environmental data sheets that you had mentioned, I don't necessarily think they're a requirement, so that's probably why you don't find it with every single company. But yeah, a lot of the larger companies will, provide that if you reach out. So, John, just two comments. Tony had kind of talked about this before. Thank you for looking at the whole petition process for 6H for auto refinish. I'd really hope that you could maybe go a little bit further. To be consistent between the various 6H categories, like the miscellaneous metal and plastic, or the general coating part of the rule. There is no petition or need for a petition. So we would hope that EPA in the technology review could remove that process. I think it's important too that in addition to the 0.1 and 1% cutoff for target HAPs, there is a major source rule for metal parts, for example, and that major source rule has a limit, essentially exemption for 50 gallons of coatings per year. One problem with auto refinish is that you could have an automobile that was initially painted with a target HAP, and to then touch up that car or to fix a panel, a little bit of coating with target HAP could essentially, fix the issue, as opposed to having to essentially, repaint a large portion of that vehicle with a non-target HAP product. Yes, you probably won't produce as many HAPs, but then you're going to have potentially, increase in VOC emissions and of course cost. So we'd like, we can discuss this further, but in addition to the 0.1 and the 1% thresholds, might there be a possibility of a small amount of coatings that could be excluded per year? Again, just to address that one issue. And then John, you had mentioned industry trends. Unfortunately, I think you're under a pretty tight deadline of November 1st to get the proposal out. Being it's summer, it's going to be difficult for the industry to pull all that data together. I have an idea. I was wondering if EPA would be willing to maybe look at TRI data for coatings manufacturing facilities, including even the auto refinish coating manufacturing facilities. And hopefully, I think you might see that over time, as these operations moved away from the HAPs, their own TRI emissions have gone down. It's important that in our industry, not only our raw material providers, the chemical manufacturers, have to comply with area source and major source rules. Our actual coating manufacturing plants, again, are subject to major source and area source rules, as well as the 6H and other rules for our customers. You combine all that together, there's multiple regulations up and down the supply chain that's really caused a great reduction in HAP content. So I would think that would be, if you look to the TRI data, you might be able to see that trend. Just a thought, happy to discuss that further. And finally, I'll just leave with, I know that we're going to meet later in this week to go over some of these issues, and I look forward to that. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Cool. Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. Tony, was that helpful?
Absolutely. We'll see if some questions come in. In the meantime, I will tell a quick story on that. Last month, I got a call from a major paint manufacturer who said that there was a new car out that's yellow-green in color, and the chemist had called them asking what they could do because there was no way to get a really good color match on that car without using a target HAP. And this particular company is one of those that really has gotten away. Almost everybody has completely gotten away from target HAP. And so everybody knows that's a huge deal. Don't introduce any new target HAP paints. We don't want to do that. But then they're calling me, asking me what to do and stuff. So this is a problem that would be solved by your example that Dave gave about the 50 gallons per year or something like that, some kind of a de minimis where, because the way this works in real life is like, say, there's a 2-inch scratch on a door, you can use a target HAP coating and just blend it and only deal with a small part of that door. The alternative is if you use a non-target HAP coating, it might not color match well, and you might have to paint that entire door. You might have to take it off. You might have to take off all the hardware. The prices go through the roof, and then you're using more paint, more emissions, more VOC emissions, and you've traded all of that just because of a little bit of target HAP that people don't want to deal with. So some kind of de minimis thing, even though that's challenging, is probably worthwhile there. And let's see if we got any more questions. I just noticed that mine went away a little bit. Okay, so there are only 10 minutes left in the session. You guys get your questions in here.
5 minutes now.
Oh, we're down to 5 now.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, my clock is off on my computer for some reason. But I don't see any coming in right now. Let's see. I noticed that John talked about this, and John, if you could maybe just expand just a little bit to let people know this time frame that you're in right now is a non-formal docket, so that it's not the old process of, you know, everything has to be completely written out and your comments are recorded in there forever in a log or something like that. Can you talk about how this is a good time to just talk casually?
Sure. Once we propose, you can still comment. We have to send us letters and they'll be published on the public dockets. Anyone can see it. Anyone can see who you are, where you're from, what you're saying. At this point, before, like here or just later on, you can get in touch with me and just bring up issues. And I'm happy to look more into the issues, and I'm happy to consider anything you bring to me now. So that could be useful on all sides. That it can be tough for us to change direction after we propose. That does kind of set how we move forward. We have less freedom to change things at that point. So any early input will be much appreciated.
Yeah, Tony, this is
Thanks.
Keith. Let me add a little bit to that. You know, as John's alluding to, initially, before we do proposal, if we interact with folks, we are only required to put in the docket the information that is necessary to substantiate what we propose. And that's a case where, again, if we have a discussion or there's information that didn't get used in the rulemaking, we don't docket that information. We keep it in a file potentially, but we don't necessarily docket, and it could be FOIA'd if someone were to do that. But in the case of once proposal is done and we receive written comments, you know, all those written comments go into the docket. You know, the whole comment goes into the docket. And of course, we still interact with people a lot after proposal. But again, that information, those types of contacts do have to be docketed. Now, we don't necessarily always docket them. For example, if we have an industry meeting subsequent to proposal, we might put it in the docket. You know, we had a meeting with industry and here's the items we discussed. We don't go, you know, write in great detail, you know, he said this and she said that. But we do have to document any contacts that we have that substantially, any substantive in contacts that we have subsequent to proposal.
Great, thanks, Keith. And by the way, everybody, that's Keith Barnett. He's John's boss, and he knows us because we've been dealing with him for a long time. But he also came to at least one of our national conferences in person, and you liked it. I know that, Keith. So we hope
right.
to get you back sometime. That would be great.
I'd actually love to come back.
So we are going to have an industry ACA meeting with all the major paint manufacturers. I've spoken to all the major ones individually, personally, but we're going to meet with John and Keith, I think, Friday, and hash some of this stuff out some more. If you guys, because we haven't got a lot of questions here or a lot of answers, but you know kind of what John said he was after. We really need that information. Now is a great time to pull it out. And yeah, we'll probably do some formal comments later, but if you can arm me with some more information so I can go to those meetings and tell them what kind of stuff people are having trouble with besides what I know about, that would be great. Just email me or something.
So Tony and John, I believe one other question that just came in. Has there been any tracking on how the RegNav tool has been used on the EPA website, like number of people that have viewed it or used it?
I don't know much about any tracking. I don't think that they easily have that. I think I asked at one point and they didn't have like Google Analytics on that page.
But Allison has it for the SB page. So at least, I mean, it's better than nothing.
Yep.
Right. We don't necessarily drill right down to that tool. And it did go offline just for a few days, but as well as some other EPA resources. So we've been madly updating some links.
Yeah, and when we changed our website, it changed a lot of the links, and I had to get EPA. I've had to get EPA to make quite a few changes to that RegNav tool, but we'll keep making them as much as they come out.
So thank you all for your presentation, and we definitely appreciate the information and want to contribute to this rulemaking and have a great impact on the rule. So thank you for your time today. And if you have further comments or areas to make suggestions, please submit those to Tony and he can compile those and carry those forward for us. And we do have a break coming up. And Nancy, do you have some polls today?